an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Well, welcome in. Here we go. It's the 21st day of October as we record this session of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Dave Trafford here, and we are joined by Keith Leslie from CH Television and Sabrina Nanji here from the Queen's Park Observer. And I guess you finally got your internet squared away. Are you in the process of moving? Is that what your whole challenge was? Your fun in the fall?
Yeah, the move is done, and it took us about 3 weeks to get the internet set up. But so far, I think we're good to go. It looks like I'm recording. Let's see how it pans out. Missed you guys.
We can hear you. We can see you. It's all good. It's good to be back in the saddle here with us. Okay, so a couple things that we want to get to, and we promise that we'll keep to a minimum. Just shitting all over the media this week. Shall we just sort of put a moratorium on that? Well, don't get me started. So the headline this morning, and this is fresh. I was doing on the roundtable this morning on Newstalk 1010 on John Moore's show, and our friend Jerry Agar happened to be hosting the program. And we went through the whole list of things. And of course, on the top of the list was this question around the education workers who are ready to go out on strike. And the part of the story that we were focused on was this $200 or $250, depending on the needs of your kids, that the province was going to cut checks for, just to catch up, help kids catch up. I want to start there. Sabrina, this whole catch up, program, I think the budget was like $365 million. That just sounds to me as a tone-deaf move when you're telling parents, here's $365 million, but then you turn around to the education frontline workers and say, we don't have any money to give you.
Yeah, I've got to wonder about the timing of all of this, because it's smack dab in the middle of rocky negotiations, which are essentially breaking down. I think it's safe to say that now, between CUPE, which represents roughly 55,000 school support staff. So that's people like early childhood educators, librarians, custodians. And they are essentially, the lowest paid education workers. The Ford government is offering. They've been held, like all public sector workers, most public sector workers, to 1% annual increases for the last 3 years, thanks to that infamous Bill 124. And so now contracts are back up for negotiation, and the Ford government is offering 1.25% for everybody and 2% raises for everyone who earns less than $40,000. The union says that's nowhere near enough. They've proffered, 11.7% increase. So obviously wages are a big sticking point here, but you're right. Not too long ago, the Ford government reported a surplus when we had been running deficits for the last few years too. So all of this, at least looks wise on the surface of it, looks like there's money to throw around. They've now, detailed this next round of payments to parents, which can go towards tutors, but there's not very many strings attached. So it could, go from maybe, buying your kid an iPad or, some new textbooks, that type of thing, not necessarily tutors, although critics were worried that it would go to private tutors when they're saying this should go towards education workers, the people who are at the bargaining table now, trying to fight for better wages. And don't forget, this is happening as private mediation has broken down. Expert mediator William Kaplan, who has been called in the past to kind of negotiate when the province and education workers, whether it be teachers or support staff, are at an impasse at the bargaining table. And Kaplan has gotten a deal before in the 11th hour in 2019, just the day before CUPE was supposed to go on a full-on strike. There was a deal. So it's very significant that I think private mediation broke down. CUPE has already voted overwhelmingly in favor of strike action. They'll be in a legal position to do so on November 3rd, and both sides are scheduled to be back at the table on November 1st. So if you think that this ticked off CUPE, you are onto something there.
Well, I think, Keith, I heard the union leadership talking about, it's only $3 an hour. And so we talked about this last week, sort of that playing with the number. 11% sounds like such a lot of money, but when you consider that 11% only amounts to $3 an hour in the wage, that kind of, for me, makes the point. But at this stage, I would have thought that there was more there based on the quietness that we had seen over the last 10 days. And now this is just blown up in our faces.
Well, the quietness, I guess, was all of them really sticking to the let's not do this through the media as much as we can, let's try. And then the mediator just said they're too far apart. They're just, $3.25 an hour is far, far, far beyond the range the government is willing to consider. So the talks have broken down. The strike vote has been taken, and the government has, made it very, very clear that it does not want and will not tolerate withdrawal of services at schools. It does not want kids put out of schools this year. So Premier Ford did one of those, just watch me, don't force my hand type things. So we know where we're at there. It's these $200 payments, though, or $360 million, I think he said it was, Dave, totaled out. Would that help, do you think, at the negotiating table? It was Mike Schreiner, the Green Party leader, who said, these payments literally just pit parents against these education workers. Clearly, I think $360 million at the table would have gone a lot farther than $200. Not saying there's a lot of families that couldn't use $200 for the kid. Absolutely.
Okay, but seriously, that $200 is going into the gas tank for most families. It's not going to a tutor, because a tutor costs $60, $80 an hour sometimes.
Well, that's just it. They said right. you get 3 hours of tutors if you're lucky for $200. You might get 200 tanks or 2 tanks of gas. So you might get 2 weeks worth of gas if you're lucky. So realistically, this is straight up money it should be at the bargaining table. I think in many people's minds. I don't mean parents can't use this money. I don't want to make that impression at all. Of course they can. Everyone can use help with inflation right now. It's gone crazy. But this is you're in the midst of these crucial negotiations. You've already said for this group, they are lower paid. You're going to exempt the 1% thing. You're going to set that aside that you're holding. Even on nurses, you're still holding it. You're going to exempt it for these workers because there's clearly a need. 1.25% for some, up to 2% for those that are the lowest paid. Really, come on, come to the table. Let's get this settled, or else you've just given $360 million away. The election's not for 4 years. That's the kind of thing you do just before the election, like the license plate rebate fees. That worked. Doing it now just seems a waste of money. And as Sabrina pointed out, we appear to have a $2 billion surplus or something. We thought the deficit was somewhere around $13 billion. It appears it's a surplus of $2 billion. We'll find out confirmation numbers in the fall economic statement in a few weeks. But there's money to be had here. You don't want to strike in the education system. You've already conceded the CUPE workers are pretty low paid in many cases. It's going to take money to settle it. That's all there is to it.
Well, let me ask you this, and just in terms of, because there's new development in terms of the minister's comments today. But I just want to go back to the mediation part of this. And you point out, Sabrina, that the mediator here this isn't his first rodeo. And that, in fact, he's looking at this and saying he's the one that made the decision, okay, enough. Go to your corners. We're going to come back, pretty much on the eve of the prospective strike date. You got to wonder at what level he's being strategic and activist in this. And I realize he's supposed to be, and I'm not suggesting that, questioning his integrity or anything else, but if this isn't a nuanced, subtle part of his role as a mediator, all right, you guys can't get together, bugger off, and we're not going to let anything happen until we get right down to a very critical point on the eve of a possible strike. I wonder how much strategy there is there in that. I don't know if you have any insight on it or not, but it just occurred to me as you were talking. That's a pretty nuanced role for a mediator.
Yeah, and I've asked for an interview. I'm not holding my breath, though, because, of course, not everyone likes to, especially the mediator probably doesn't want to be, talking about what's happening behind the scenes at the bargaining table.
Well, he doesn't want to be the story. I get it.
Exactly, yeah. But he's a very interesting guy. And like I said, he has managed to mediate deals between, sides that seem like polar opposites right now. But for me, I think what was the most telling was Laura Walton, who's the president of CUPE's Ontario School Boards Council of Unions. So she's kind of like the main one that we're hearing from on the union side of things. And she essentially hinted that the threat of a full-on strike action is what got the Ford government to budge the last time and actually, make a proposal that in the union's view was fair and reasonable. And so, Laura Walton basically told us reporters this week that when they had threatened, work to rule, and of course I just want to preface all of this, there's obviously a process, we're now in the 17-day countdown to when the union will be in a legal strike position. They need to give 5 days notice of any action. It could be something like work to rule, where they're just, scaling back their duties a little bit rather than a full on walking off the job thing. And Laura Walton, the head of the union, said that the last time they were in negotiations, and this was coming up, that when the union had threatened work to rule, not a full on strike, it didn't do much. But when they, gave the notice of a full on strike, that's kind of what got the government to budge a little bit. And so I think to Keith's point, the education minister saying that we will do everything we can to keep kids in class. Obviously, making education workers essential service workers, limiting their ability to strike in some way would be a very bold and drastic move. I don't know if the Ford government wants to exactly do that, because then you kind of give up a lot of your bargaining power anyway. I mean, I know they're already in mediation now, but you're kind of leaving it up to a mediator if you go that route, and you're kind of just left with what the mediator decides. And so I think that, everyone taking a breather is probably just Kaplan's tactic. I don't know if he's got any tricks up his sleeves here, but if the union, it seems like, if I'm reading between the lines of what Walton says, that they'll at least threaten a strike. And I think that it's interesting that Lecce is kind of, as Mike Schreiner put it, seemingly pitting parents against education workers, because obviously when it comes to, school strikes, it's parents and families who, vote, that they are the ones, those are the people you have to win over. It's not necessarily the workers or the province, that everyone's concerned about the optics when it comes to families having to deal with this.
Okay, so let me just pick up on your note about, go to your corners and take a breather. This morning, as I pointed out, was on John Moore's show, and Jerry Agar was the host. And after we got off the air on the roundtable, Minister Lecce joined the show. And Jerry wanted to ask him about the $200 and $250 payments for parents. In the course of it, the minister did anything but take a breather or turn down the heat. I want to listen to the exchange here. Now, Jerry Agar is interviewing, and as we go through this. So thanks to our friends at Newstalk 1010. But I think this is important because it really changes the dynamic in this discussion. Here's Minister Lecce talking about the state of the negotiations and what is on the table.
The other entitlements, as I say, the pension benefits, et cetera, those things cannot be decoupled from the discussion. So what I'm saying to the workers is we appreciate them. We're going to increase their pay every year, and we're going to maintain the best benefit program in the nation. I just believe that their union leadership needs to hear me when I say children should not pay the price because the union's not getting nearly 50% increase in compensation. I just think that is entirely unfair to kids.
50%?
Nearly 50% increase when you add up the salary of 11% a year plus all the requests and demands they've made. They want to be paid for prep time. They want an increase in benefits. Yes, it's a nearly 50% increase over the 3 years of the contract.
Okay, so we were already playing with numbers when we used 11%. Now we've got 50% on the table. He has gone nuclear on this, I think, Keith.
That's fun with figures, isn't it? Holy cow. I think the fun with figures started at the beginning of this negotiating process when CUPE said their average worker was making $39,000. We go, wow, that's in 2022 that's pretty low. Turned out that's part time, and if you factor in this and that and the other, it's closer to 50-odd thousand. Okay, so we're going to have fun with figures. 50%. That's not toning down negotiations. That's not going to your corner and being quiet and figuring out a new plan. Saying that the union, with everything they're asking for, wanting to be paid for prep time. Imagine wanting to be paid for prep time, and these other things, and your pension benefit, and you're going to cost. And if I multiply all, I was promised would be no math on this, but apparently it adds up to 50-odd% over the next 3 years. I want to call BS on that. I think it's just nonsense. But the tone of it. The actual government, as you say, Dave, he's pouring fuel on the fire here. He's just pouring gasoline right on top of it, saying the union's demanding 50%. Well, who's going to support the union? And of course, he's doing that classic conservative thing, although I think the Liberals is to some degree. I'm speaking to the union bosses, not the workers themselves. It's these damn union bosses who get a 98% strike mandate. It's those union bosses. Well, come on. You're talking to these workers and you're saying directly to them, we're going to give some money to some parents and you better be in class. That's the bottom line. That's their big, big concern. And 50%, that's just vilifying the people that they admitted were, so low paid that they had to expand beyond their 1% pay limit for everybody else.
So let me suggest to you, Sabrina, back to your point about the essential service, that actually making them consider them an essential service, not allowed to strike, would actually save them that less than 50%, in the long run. Because you know what? We keep coming back to, I know it goes to arbitration, and sometimes, more often than not, that favors the unions and prices get out of hand. You have to remember that the TTC was made an essential service back, I don't know how many years ago now, but it was a Liberal government that did it. And we have had no problems here in Toronto or vis-a-vis transit unions. And there's been no screaming and yelling about the awards that the union gets in their contracts. So I just think that might be a little bit of old rearview mirror thinking, that if in fact we can avoid all of the bullshit that we've been going through in terms of the heat and the anger and the finger pointing and the angst around the education system over the last 2.5 years, from now on, I think most people, whether you're a parent or not, would be happy to pay it, and let's just get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, of course it's a risk and you have to weigh, the outcomes for everything, like everything here. But also, CUPE is the first of the major education unions. There's 5. And don't forget, teachers are still in talks too. And obviously, are generally speaking higher paid, and would, potentially be more disruptive if they were to strike too. So I think CUPE is kind of setting the tone here. I've noticed that the other unions, ETFO, the elementary teachers, OSSTF, the high school teachers, they've been very quiet, while CUPE and Lecce are kind of going back and forth here. And there are new rules, in this round of bargaining too, right? There's always that old line, we don't want to bargain through the media. That could potentially be seen as bargaining in bad faith, if you're
that's
a mediator.
Out the window.
Yeah, and so they changed the rules. So now everyone's talking.
Right.
We have the premier saying things like, don't force my hand. And so I think that, it eventually comes down to parents. Everyone's trying to win parents over in this side. And so that's what I meant when I said the timing of those $200 payments has raised a lot of eyebrows. I don't have kids yet, but my friends who do said that this is kind of insulting. What is that $200 going to do? Of course they can use it. Every little bit helps now, but is it, worth this grief that's happening with the teachers? I'm not sure about that one.
I want to get to the focus on Ottawa, and I think this was probably above the fold on your newsletter today on the Queen's Park Observer. The whole question around whether or not Premier Doug Ford should be testifying in front of the inquiry vis-a-vis the use of the Emergency Measures Act in Ottawa. A couple things, Keith. I'm just, first of all, I'm not sure, generally speaking, what this inquiry will accomplish. So far, we've had some granular detail been added to sort of pixelate the picture, but there's been, from my perspective, nothing really shocking come out of this to tell me that something I didn't already know. Were they understaffed in Ottawa for the police to slowly misread the room? Yes, he did. Was there infighting going on at City Council and the Police Services Board? And yes, there was. Was the OPP and Ottawa Police Service communicating effectively? No, they weren't. Okay, so a lot of this stuff we already knew. Yes, we're getting people to be held to account to some degree because they have to admit it under oath. But I don't know that at the end of the day we're really going to get to a point where the report's going to come out and it says, as a result of this, we have to do this, and this. It will still be up to be the government of the day to implement whatever recommendation comes out of it. So I think all that's a little fuzzy. Having said that, all of this, or the majority of it, happened in the province of Ontario. It happened while we were blocking the bridge in Windsor, and it was a small matter of 3 weeks of the convoy in Ottawa. Why they would not want? First of all, why he wasn't on the original witness list? I don't understand that. You had 65 other people on the list, including the Prime Minister, and you don't have the Premier of the province.
Well, I guess that shows if you just don't go to the meetings and don't send anyone, they won't invite you to come testify about it. So that worked. Oh, okay. The scariest thing that's come out of these hearings in Ottawa this week, this first week of hearings into the Emergencies Act, is that just like the January 6th occupation or storming of the U.S. Congress, there's a percentage of Canadians that view what happened in Ottawa for those 3 weeks completely differently than the vast majority of us. And they still view it that way. So these divisions that we see in the United States are here in Canada. I don't know if they're as deep, but the fact that they're still here is kind of scary. Now, back to your point, Dave, about Premier Ford and the then Solicitor General, Sylvia Jones. Ontario really did seem to just sort of, put its head in the sand. I want nothing to do with this. And one thing we heard from the testimony this week and some of the documents that were presented, that, Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson and the Prime Minister Trudeau were having a discussion about, well, where is Premier Ford? Trudeau basically said, ask the province for some resources before you come back to us again. And Watson and Trudeau started discussing, well, where's Ford? Well, he's clearly doesn't want to upset his base. He's trying to avoid this. So what we clearly saw was the provincial government really just, I don't know, I want to say abdicated its responsibilities, but they really wanted nothing to do with what was going on in Ottawa until the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor was blockaded. And now we started talking hundreds of millions of dollars in a very short order of time. And that's when okay, let's get the police. We don't direct the police. That was the government's line all along, the provincial government's line. And we don't order the police. It's up to the police. We don't direct them. Boy, somebody sure directed something, because that Ambassador Bridge got dealt with fairly quickly. So it's ironic to hear Trudeau and Watson being very critical of Ford. And then the other thing we heard was, Premier Ford standing beside Prime Minister Trudeau saying, I stand shoulder to shoulder with the Prime Minister's use of the Emergency Measures Act. Stunning. Ford could have ducked that question. He certainly angered a lot of Conservatives across the country, federal Conservatives, other Conservative premiers, by this shoulder to shoulder bit with the Prime Minister. So he did that. He's not afraid to stand there with the Prime Minister. I think clearly he knows that, the same people that elect Trudeau are electing the Ford government as well. But I thought that was quite stunning to see this come out, and at the same time hear Trudeau and Watson, going on, where the hell is Ford? He doesn't want to anger his base. So I think the fact that he still apparently has not been asked to testify. There's pressure from the Civil Liberties Association and others that want him to testify. The province has apparently sent a lot of documents. But this whole thing, how they managed to play this, even at the time, we're not going to your meetings in Ottawa to try and deal with this as it's happening. That would be a waste of time. How did they get away with that? Clearly, as you say, Dave, the police, the communication between the different levels of police was terrible. But we had the Solicitor General from the province saying that there was, what was her number? 1,500 OPP officers in Ottawa when there was 50 or something. Like, someone should have to answer some questions about that. As Jim Watson said, you would see 1,500 OPP officers if they convened in that area. It was just, let's talk realistic here. So the fact the province is not testifying is not surprising to me, but it probably angers an awful lot of people in Ottawa who think that their provincial government basically just ignored them throughout this thing. And until things got really sticky in Windsor in a hurry, the province wasn't even anywhere to be seen.
Now, two things on that, though, Sabrina. I'd just be curious to get your take, because let's face it, this is carved right down political lines. Watson and the Prime Minister, that's the Liberal line. And it's easy to kind of say, the Tories are protecting themselves, and makes the comment about hiding. Clearly, there's a personal thing going on with Ford and Watson at this point, for sure. And the only reason I say that is because let's remember that we had the truckers visit us here in Toronto in the course of all that. Toronto police responded similarly. They cordoned off Queen's Park. They did it very quickly. So clearly, they didn't do that without provincial government cooperation, because that's the purview of the OPP. So it was clear that the Premier was prepared to make some moves when Queen's Park was the focus of this protest and the convoy, and worked clearly very well with the Toronto Police Service and the mayor here in Toronto. So there's something else going on there beyond the actual function of government, because on the one hand, we see where all levels worked well in Toronto. What the hell happened in Ottawa? I think that there's more to the story than there was before that initial phone call that we all, that breathtaking phone call about Prime Minister saying, well, Ford's just in hiding.
Yeah, I mean, hell hath no fury like an outgoing mayor scorned. And there is
Exactly.
There's
Good
no
point.
love lost between Jim Watson, who is not seeking re-election, and just because of his comments lately, just as on a bit of a tangent here with the whole strong mayor situation, I think he can maybe speak a bit more freely because he's on his way out, and so I have been like just lounging on like popcorn here, like watching Watson's testimony. But there's a lot of finger pointing going, and right when we were in the middle of all of this, there was a lot of finger pointing going on at the time too. So what's coming out of this inquiry so far? Watson said it himself, every level of government, at some point had to shoulder some of this blame here. And I think, it was maybe on brand for Ford to, seemingly act more quickly, with the whole Ambassador Bridge situation in Windsor, because that's kind of like a business-minded thing, maybe more so. And obviously, Ford's the man of business premier. So I think, also Watson has come out swinging against the strong mayor stuff too, saying he wasn't informed about it. He found out about it, in the media. He doesn't need it. He doesn't want it. It's not going to do anything to help housing. And yeah, he's a former, provincial Liberal minister, which, might be contributing to some of this. But I do think, Ford has some explaining to do, and that, doing it under oath is a lot different than having sending your top bureaucrats there who, I'm sure have very, sharp insight to offer too. But it's just this huge contrast that I think has raised a lot of eyebrows and left a lot of questions, and actually, kind of prompted the CCLA a little bit to push the commission, to call Ford to testify. And my understanding is that if he's called to testify and refuses, the commission can summon him and kind of force him, which, just for me personally, that was something I didn't know too much about the process, because I thought, parliamentary privilege, they can get out of that type of thing. Not so here. I don't know if we'll end up actually going down that whole path there. In terms of, actually forcing Ford to testify. But, it's one thing when you're getting up there with Trudeau, who's, beaming and nodding in agreement, saying we stood shoulder to shoulder. And then the commission comes out with, well, this guy was snowmobiling because he doesn't want to piss off his base, if I can say that. But yeah, I think that I don't know if we're actually going to see Ford testify, but his office, when we ask him, has been very cagey on it. They weren't saying yes or no. It's just like, well, we aren't asked. We've handed over hundreds of documents. We're sending our top bureaucrats. But I think at the end of the day, you're right. We kind of just need some accountability here, especially for the people that we're dealing with this, mainly in Ottawa. Because I think we're kind of just seeing more now through the commission that we were seeing at the time, which was a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blame being tossed around, and nothing really happening here. So this is kind of just shedding light on that chaos, I think.
Before we go, I just want to get to the point that the session resumes. I was going to say the recession resumes, but that's another story.
Freudian slip.
Yeah, the session resumes on, I guess, Tuesday, the day after the municipal election. You point out that, the strong mayor legislation kicks in there, so we will have the new mayor of Ottawa, Toronto's mayor, presumably John Tory, will be blessed with those new powers. But the first thing that they're going to do, it seems as though the province, when they come back, is really get back to this whole question of making sure that they can produce some extraordinary, what is that, 100,000 houses a year or something they're going to have to build. It's a crazy number of houses. I don't know. And I'm not complaining. I'm just thinking that's what needs to be done. But that was the impetus behind the strong mayor initiative to begin with. But this idea, and we've talked about this before, where they can kind of go in and supersede any local bylaws to make sure that we don't get hung up on local NIMBYism, that sort of thing. On the one hand, I understand that, and I kind of cheer for it a little bit, because I think municipalities, neighborhood by neighborhood, can just bog down a larger planning initiative that makes sense in terms of increased density, increased supply, bringing down prices. And I've talked to Tim Hudak this week about that very thing. And, he'll bang the drum on it. So I expect he will be welcoming the minister's legislation this week. Do we have a sense of exactly how that's... I mean, it's easy to talk about the strong mayors, but this is going to apply to every municipality. So there will be mayors like Bonnie Crombie who are going to have to eat that, and she doesn't have the strong mayor power.
Well, they're actually getting them soon. So what I'm hearing is on Tuesday when the House comes back, Steve Clark, Housing Minister, is going to table this omnibus housing legislation, a bunch of changes in there, everything from development charges to changing inclusionary zoning rules and conservation authorities, appeals processes at the Ontario Land Tribunal, that type of thing. But people like Bonnie Crombie, Patrick Brown, potentially, Andrew Horvath in Hamilton, maybe Stephen Del Duca in Vaughan, any city and town with a population over 100,000 will be getting those strong mayor powers at some point next year. I'm hearing within 6 months from roughly now, so maybe early next year. But, people like Bonnie Crombie had asked for those powers. And I think some other, councillors in Brampton had begged the province not to give them to Patrick Brown. But the election day is on Monday. So we'll end up seeing who specifically is going to be getting these powers. But they're definitely coming to a town and city near you soon.
It'll be interesting as well to see if this legislation includes what they've talked about before, which is basically allowing a duplex or a triplex to be built in any neighborhood anywhere. That's the first step to getting to that missing middle they talk about in housing. Will the province take that step? Just basically say to any municipality, don't care what your local planning is, if someone wants to build a duplex or triplex, pretty well anywhere that there's residential, they can. If that comes, that will be a huge step towards actually making a dent perhaps at some point in the price of housing, but at least in the supply. And maybe, if you can get 2 or 3 families living on one lot instead of one family living on one lot, that goes a heck of a long way. And it does not destroy neighborhoods. Many neighbors. I lived in Cabbagetown for 25 years. There was many 3-story buildings in there that went way back. You didn't even notice how deep they were. There were quite a few apartments in there, probably 10, 12 units in there. Didn't even notice. They didn't disrupt the neighborhood. They were part of the neighborhood. So it can absolutely be fit into any neighborhood if it's done properly. But will the province take that big of a step? And as for the Ontario Land Tribunal, I think it was The Spectator last week did a report that something like 98% of their decisions so far have gone towards developers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to keep the powder dry on the what's going on with the municipal elections, but it looks like, it's a shit show in Hamilton, same in Brampton. But let's let that play out to see who lands in the mayor's chair in those cases and elsewhere. But and the character of the councils that come out of these, because there's a lot of seats that are available in those areas where there's no incumbent. Certainly, there are a lot here in Toronto. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But we'll get to that next Friday. So that'll do it for us. This is the October 21st edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Thanks to Sabrina and Nanji from the Queen's Park Observer. And if you hadn't already subscribed to our newsletter, do so, because it just kind of makes you smarter. That's how it works, just generally. And Keith Leslie from CH Television. I'm Dave Trafford for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.